Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Lab Automation 101. In a first for the podcast, we don't just have one guest, we have two. We have Meghan and Denis from Genie Life Sciences. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Alex.
Alex, thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. And I think you would have noted I've avoided trying to pronounce your last names. That's my kryptonite, to be honest with you. So I've just kept it to Meghan and to Denis. But I'm just curious how you pronounce your last names, actually. So, Meghan, you want to go first?
Mine is Bouchie. It's fairly straightforward.
Okay.
I'm actually a Furzoko now, but at work I still go by Bouchie.
Okay, fair enough. That's fine. Denis, I'm not even going to attempt, to be honest.
Oh no, you shouldn't. Mine is Knjazihhin, and it's originally Russian, and it's hard even there. So I'm widely known as Denis K because of that, and I accept that, and I think that makes things a lot simpler.
It's a lot easier. So, well, I mean, listen. Before we get stuck in, maybe I'll just give the floor to you guys. For about a minute or so. If you just want to talk through a little bit Genie Life Sciences, who you are, what you do, that'll be good to know.
Yeah, sure. Let me start. So I'm one of the founders of Genie Life Sciences. And honestly, to tell the truth, I am an outsider to the industry. Most of my career I spent in software. Specifically, I spent most of my career in cybersecurity. And then, along with our other co-founders, we're looking at industries that can be disruptive with some of the new and novel approaches and how software is built, how hardware is built, and, innovations that come up in, other industries throughout the world. And life sciences seemed like just the place for disruption like that. And that's mostly because while biology is amazing, and biologists are changing the world around us. The technology part and biotech, specifically software, but also hardware, hasn't kept up with what is possible and what should be possible to further accelerate science. So a few years ago, we got together and decided to quit all of our jobs and found Genie Life Sciences.
Wow!
And I've been at it ever since.
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, I think we have that in common then, Denis. I mean, I don't have your background in particular, but I'm also a little bit of an outsider. Not so much in cybersecurity and in the technology and so forth. I was actually in two industries, in confectionery and in wholesale liquidation industry before I came into this industry. So it's actually quite good sometimes to come in from the outside. You don't come in necessarily with lenses, so to speak, maybe clouded a little bit to a certain extent. So
I mean, people then bring in, at least I believe, new perspectives, right? And new know-how that they learned in other industries, right? But then, on the other hand, maybe come in with some blind spots. But then folks like Meghan, who is from this industry and is amazing, close them.
Yeah, I've spent my whole career in the life sciences industry. I am a molecular biologist by trade, and started my career in a lab and spent a lot of time there before moving into the sales side. I run the commercial side at Genie Life Sciences, and something that attracted me was that we were a team of industry outsiders, and really what they brought to the table is different than I had ever heard within the industry before. And the speed at which we've been able to innovate has been incredible and really, really impressive from, coming from within the industry and seeing the speed at which it moves, and then seeing how that's been accelerated with this team.
It's interesting. So, I mean, just building on what you said then, and what Denis was talking about before, because I went on your website, I read a little bit about your About Us section, and you describe yourselves. I just want to read this so I make sure I get it correct. It's a group of talented engineers disrupting the world of automation. And I know, Denis, you touched on it a little bit, but I'm actually really curious, before I start asking you, how you're going about bringing about the disruption, it's really what was motivating you to do so, I guess, in this particular industry?
Sure. So this is not the first startup that I'm a part of. It's actually fourth startup in a row. And like everybody, I'm not special in any way, but like everybody, I specialize in something. We all specialize in something, and I specialize in building, let's call it the 1.0, the first version of a product, something has never built before. You do that by trying to find industries where you can come in and build something new and make a difference. So in a way, it had to be a disruption of something, right? It didn't necessarily have to be in bioscience, but that's what this team does. And we attacked bioscience because it seemed very exciting, and two, it seemed actually easy to do. Not that what we do is easy, but the gaps of what is possible and what exists seem to be pretty significant. And we can certainly get into the details, as we go through the podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm interested then. So you talk about the gap there between, what is possible and what exists and so forth. So that leads me to my second question. How about then are you bringing about this disruption then?
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of the problems in biotech, specifically in automation, or at least problems that I believe exist. If you look at, if you looked at the current automation solutions, like current automation that's being built, it's fairly siloed, brittle, and it's definitely very, very expensive. And one of the reasons that is the case is because it's hard to use. There is no ease of use. And what you do is, in order to build an automated solution, you rely on very highly skilled people, very specialized instruments, usually instruments that do one specific task, pretty well, some just fairly well, but don't work well with other instrumentation. So when you try to bring it all together, you end up with kind of these one-off solutions that may meet a given use case, but if your assay changes, if your workflow changes, then these specialized solutions are often pushed to the side and you lose the investment that you made. Or if you lose your automation engineer because that person moves to a different company or starts doing something else, you lose that investment as well, because now there's nobody around to program those instruments.
And Alex, I don't think that there's just that piece of ease of use. There are other platforms that are easy to use, but you lose the extensibility that automation engineers need and want. And I think that we hit the sweet spot there, that, we're both easy to use, but on the back end, everything's driven by Python. So if something doesn't exist within our platform already, it certainly can be built.
Yeah, that's right. So besides, you need ease of use, you need repeatability, and you need consistency. But let me give concrete examples. So it's not just high level overview of the problems. I'm going to use liquid handling as an example, and the reason I'm going to use liquid handling is, of course, Genie Life Sciences we build our own liquid handler. But this example will apply to any instrument that you have. If you go and buy a liquid handler today, you'll get a liquid handler, you get a Windows desktop PC, and you get an application. An application was originally written in the 90s. So kind of the desktop apps you used to use in the 90s, and the usability they present and the challenges they present, they're all there, right? They haven't evolved. And by the way, you just spent maybe, $250,000, maybe $500,000. Imagine buying a car for $500,000, right? Like, it will be absolutely perfect. It will do exactly what you want, right? Now, think about you go and you buy a second instrument, exactly the same one from same manufacturer. It doesn't matter what manufacturer it is. Let's say the serial number is just off by one. You're going to get a second liquid handler. You're going to get a second Windows PC, and it's going to manage your second liquid handler. And if you want them both to do exactly the same thing, you have to switch from PC to PC and make an adjustment. And if you're lucky, you can export your workflow, import it into the next PC, it might work. But usually it doesn't. Usually it needs some adjustment. So that adds a lot of complexity in managing this whole environment, right? And keeping things in sync. Why not have a way, even as simple as, let's have one application that manages the same type of instruments from one central place, right? So you write your workflow once and it'll run on any one of those instruments, right? And then let's, why just manage one type of instrument? Why just liquid handlers? Why not plate washers, plate readers, and then whatever else you might throw? So then you can start building up a general purpose management solution that doesn't just focus on a single instrument, but focus all the instrumentation you have in the lab. So you have one consistent, one consistent approach to managing them, and one consistent UX to put everything under a single roof. So we call the approach single pane of glass. It's pretty standard on the software industry side. And this is one of the areas that we're trying to bring innovation. So kind of, make it easy to manage, instruments of the same type, make it easy to manage instruments of multiple types, and present kind of a unified management plane across your entire laboratory. The second thing that we try to do is also get away from the need to force people to know how to program. I personally think programming is great. I still write code and it's exciting, right? But as a scientist, right, your value is understanding biology. Your greatest value is understanding biology. Your greatest value is pushing the boundaries of biology to go forward. And while it's great to also know how to program, that shouldn't be a requirement for you to take your assays and automating them. So we're focusing on a drag and drop approach, where when scientists just need to express, they just express a scientific intent versus, writing lines of code. And then we take that scientific intent and translate how to best execute it on an instrument. Now, we don't translate it blindly. We translate it and we give them all the ability to tweak anything we translated and make additional optimization and adjustments, so it's not entirely like a black box. And then, as Meghan said, if you are more advanced in your needs, and maybe we don't have the optimizations quite right, and you want to write code, we will let you do that as well. But the whole point is to make automation more approachable, so you don't need to have tons of training in order to make use of automation, that you don't need tons of time investment in to make use of automation. It can be one of those things that, each time you want to do automation, you need to spend, 2 months of somebody's time to program it, to set it up, to make it work, right? It should be something that you can walk up to, spend an hour, spend 2 hours, and then you have something automated that you don't have to do manually anymore. By making it approachable, by really lowering that barrier to entry to automation, I believe we can really disrupt the space, because I believe then more and more people will be able to take advantage of automation. That, of course, in turn is going to help science.
And of course, I like the term that you use, to make automation more approachable. I think historically it's always been really cost and complexity, which have been barriers for a lot of labs. I think it's helped reinforce, I guess, at times some myths about lab automation, that it's, this $250,000, $500,000, like that car that you described, it's nice to have, but it's way, beyond my reach, it's beyond my budget, and so forth. It's too complex. I have to know how to program, I have to write code, and so on and so forth. When in reality is today, actually, you don't need any of those things. You could be spending, well under $30,000. You can automate a particular workflow, and you don't need to know how to code even. And you're right, the scientist has to be the star in the lab, and they have to focus on their job and excel at that, as opposed to sitting writing code and whatnot. So Dennis, just building on that one then, because disruption, and you I think you were interchanging with the term with innovation as well, and disruption itself implies doing something new, being creative, and so on and so forth. So talking about automation as a whole, do you think therefore that lab automation is I want to say a precursor for innovation in the lab then? In that you can be creative because of automation.
Well, it certainly, you need automation in order to scale your processes, right? Like in any lab. So the more you take advantage of automation, the more you end up getting consistent and repeatable results, especially if you end up doing it well, especially if you end up doing it correctly. And that's a gain in efficiency, right? So, and gain consistency. So if you want to go and build new biological processes for anything, right? You don't want to continue to rely on humans to do, let's take liquid handling example, to just pipette all day. That's a waste of their time, right? You're talking about like just think who we're talking about. You're talking about folks who went to top universities. They were so committed to this, to biology, to science, that they went off to get PhDs, which takes years to get, right? And then they graduate and they pipette. That's crazy. That is a huge waste of their time. That's a huge waste of their ability. Like, how can we want to live in an industry where we take highly skilled people and give them such mundane jobs? Those mundane jobs should be pushed to machinery, should be pushed to software, and we should free up their minds to make, to focus on truly transformative work.
That's a good point. And Meghan, as the only biologist therefore in the room, what's your take on it?
I mean, I would have loved to have a liquid handler in our lab. Unfortunately, in our lab, it was cost prohibitive. Like, we just didn't have the money. We outsourced our NGS to a core lab at Boston Medical. And, it was one of those things that's what people did. And it was many years ago, and automation was much more expensive back then. But even now, so many people outsource to core labs. So making automation more accessible, and, sitting in a lab and just doing washes, repetitive washes, for example, anyone can do that. I mean, Denis's 5-year-old could do that. Like, my infant can't quite do that yet, but one day she will be able to, and she doesn't have to be that skilled in order to do it. So, in order to drive innovation within a lab, it is important that people have that time to do that. Because if you're stuck in, that rut of doing that same thing over and over again, unfortunately, you don't have time to have that creative drive to advance your biology or your chemistries within your laboratory.
Yeah, I think it's just having that thinking time. I mean, I think a lot of people think, mistakenly, and I've seen this in other industries, that somehow it just comes to you. You're sitting in the bath, like that old, I don't know if you've seen that cartoon, just sitting in the bath, all of a sudden you got eureka moment. Oh, I'm going to do this. But reality is innovation and creation and creativity. It's just like anything else. You actually have to sit, you have to discuss, you have to thrash it out. It becomes a bit messy. It's a bit complicated sometimes, but you need the time to do it.
And it's built on other people's work too. So you're constantly reading papers, you're constantly learning. And if you're constantly pipetting in your lab, guess what? You lack learning. You can't, pipette and read paper at the same time. So you're not like drinking in that information that you could potentially be if you have an automated process. And you might be still sitting near a liquid handler once in a while when your liquid handler is new. However, ultimately, you're going to be able to walk away from that and have a walk away solution where you have time to drive learning and creativity.
And so therefore, what's your take on labs today that still resist automation? Are these labs now, in the next few years, are they still going to be around? Or
I get it. I get why people resist it, right? Like I said, being new to the industry, when I first tried to use the instrumentation that's available, I was appalled, right? I get the desire of everybody says, no, forget it. I'm not going to use, instrument A or B, right? I'm just going to do it manually because the amount of time going to spend doing it is just not worth the investment. So I understand the resistance. I think the resistance is because things are hard to do. And I believe that those labs that are still have, automation resistance will, flow into the fold of automation as software and as hardware in the laboratories become much easier to use. And this is certainly something we're striving to do every single day. But I also believe we're not the only ones, certainly existing vendors trying to do the same, right? so that people can embrace automation. So it will happen. It will happen for two reasons. It will happen because people who will embrace it first or embrace it the most are going to effectively have a competitive advantage by being able to do the same thing faster and cheaper. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on folks who don't embrace automation. And the second reason is because instrumentation and software and approach to automation are going to become easier and easier through companies like Genie Life Sciences, through Genie Life Sciences itself, and it will make it easier for folks who are still on the fences to start leveraging automation.
Alex, I have one thing to add to that. Scientists are averse to change, like inherently averse to change. And it's funny that they are, and we are, because, you're trying to advance the world of science through innovation, but you go and talk to a person and they don't want to change pipette tips in the lab. Never mind, move that whole process over to the world of lab automation. So, things are very personal. And when you have something that's working as a process in a lab, you're very nervous to move that to an unknown because you're inherently putting in another variable. So the less variables that you have within an assay, the better for a scientist. So you're putting in a very big variable with lab automation. And I think it's very important to trust your vendors and to be able to see what your applications are doing and to be able to do that validation process quickly. And I think that one of the reasons that there's distrust within automation is because that process is so long. In order for people to move their manual process over to an automated one, they don't have that validation quickly. So they're going through a process and now, okay, like we could do this in 3 days through a manual process, but now we're going to automate it. And in order to do that validation, it's going to take us a month. And they're afraid that they don't have that time. And, they don't want to move over without validating. So I think that having a platform that allows you to get up and running quickly and to allow you to do that validation, to allow you to write out your scripts beforehand, to author your assays beforehand. We had one customer, she had written 40 protocols before she even got a liquid handler.
All right.
40. Had them all in, everything from a serial dilution to a very complex, PCR cleanup. So for us, being able to do all of that stuff, having, what you're going to use for consumables, the time it's going to take for you to run those assays, really gives you the pipeline of what you're going to use that liquid handler for. And sometimes just having a game plan of what you're going to use that liquid handler for is so important for your lab.
That's a good point. I mean,
Alex, if I can add something to what Meghan said, just to put one piece of background of Genie Life Sciences, right? Our software is predominantly cloud delivered. So just like when you use google.com, when you go to Genie Life Sciences, you can author, you can simulate, you can share your protocols from anywhere in the world. That's why in the example of this customer, as soon as they signed up, they had an account, 2 minutes later, and they were able to author things. And then when we rolled in with their liquid handler, like a month later, right, Meghan? They're just able to run everything they've authored over the previous couple of weeks. That's from our perspective, also a big differentiator of what's available. And I certainly believe it's also a disruptive force to make a lot of lab automation available through the cloud versus forcing people to use it on-prem. And that should be also much more obvious past the COVID experience where we all went through lockdowns and labs went through lockdowns, and ability to access these isolated Windows desktops were severely reduced.
So, so I understand, companies like Genie Life Sciences, what you're doing to, let's say, advance if I dare say, the lab automation cause, I guess, the reasons why labs should adopt it and so forth. But as an industry, therefore, what can we do as an industry? I'm a little bit struck, coming from the outside, that I don't think personally that there is a lot of industry action, if that makes sense. I've come from industries where there's all the different competitors are more used to working together for particular causes or particular reasons and so forth. I don't quite see it necessarily yet in this particular industry. So I'm interested from your perspectives as to what we can do to, as I said, to help lab automation and to reduce the barriers for other labs then.
Yeah, as vendors, we need to collaborate more, right? We need to work together to not just focus on solutions that are applicable to, let's say, a particular instrument, a particular subspace that we are in, but something that can be used across the whole laboratory. And and I see some of that, right? One thing, of course, is SELA. So it's the standards. They put out a standard of SELA 1 and SELA 2, and they're trying to bring a couple of instruments together under a common protocol. As much as I like SELA, I like what they're doing. It's going very, very slowly, and I'm not certain, it will ever be like an overwhelming success. But certainly, we are trying to be open and collaborating with other vendors and bring them in to be managed by our software. There are several who have expressed interest and who actually bring the instruments on board to be managed through Genie. Something that I can't share details of because of existing NDAs. But also, like, vendors should open their APIs so it's possible for other vendors integrates with what's called with instrumentation and software of other vendors, especially like easy to use APIs, not highly proprietary things that are just painful to consume. But there'll also be some amount of, I believe, consolidation that will make it possible. I got to use a technology example here to kind of explain what I believe will eventually happen to the industries. Think back at what the, software and hardware industry in the technology space was like in early 2000s, right, during the last .com bust. If you're a startup, and I'll tie it to lab automation in a second, Alex, but if you're a startup and you wanted to, build some new piece of software, you go to a couple of VCs, you get some money, and you'd start building up a data center, right? You bring up your routers, your switches, some storage solutions, some servers, rack mounts, and so on and so forth, right? And it was hugely capital intensive. And honestly, this is exactly what happens right now in lab automation. Like, you new biotech startup, you're going to go and you're going to start buying up all this different equipment and set up your own lab. But then fast forward what happened between like 2000 and let's say now, right? Cloud took over. So now if I want to go and build a new technology startup, I don't buy any servers, I don't buy any network switching, I don't buy any gear. I just go to a cloud provider like, Amazon or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud or whatever it is that I like. And within fairly short order, I can use very powerful, compute and networking power on a, pay-as-you-go model and just focus on the business that I'm trying to build. I believe eventually, and we might be like 10 years away or maybe 15 years away, but eventually the same thing is going to happen to lab automation where, it won't be this, expensive endeavor to go and set up your own individual labs, but there'll be these centralized nodes, just like we have, centralized cloud providers that give you the equipment that you need and give you the workflows and processes that you need. And you as a scientist, right, you just focus on the value that you can create, changes to biology, right, maybe detection of diseases, curing of diseases. And this whole lab becomes more, from your perspective, of a virtual entity, where through software you define what you want to happen, and then you get bits back of, either the measurements or the sequences or whatever else that you're looking for. And all this assays and everything are going to run in big centralized labs. And in order to get there, yes, some consolidation is going to happen, I believe will happen, but also, software is needed to be built, more like how Genie is building it, to make things available as a single pane of glass and make things available from anywhere in the world. And I am hoping that kind of as we pursue our adventure with Genie, we'll become part of that larger ecosystem, because that is what will be extremely disruptive and will turn the approach in lab automation around in a very significant way.
Well,
And
Dennis,
Alex, I think some companies have already started that. So, you go from academia where you have core labs to lab incubators where you have shared equipment spaces and you're renting space until you're large enough to move out. And I think that as you build on that experience, and maybe once you can automate in some of these places, so many lab incubators lack lab automation. I think that's a miss. And I think that, as you start to talk to lab incubators, that they are going to move towards automation at some point, because when you're a startup, again, you're time limited. You're just limited with time. So if you have a common piece of equipment that, 12, 15, 20 different companies can come utilize and sign up for time, just like a core lab, it becomes a huge, huge advantage to that lab incubator. So I really think that the industry is already starting to move in this direction. It just isn't focused on lab automation yet. So there are so many pieces of shared equipment. We just haven't gotten into that lab automation because it's not accessible. And,
right.
like Denis keeps saying, not every scientist knows how to code, and not every scientist is going to be able to utilize the robust software that some people offer.
Well, Dennis, Meghan, I think you both paint a very clear picture. I can see why you guys describe yourselves as disruptors. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time. It was really great chatting with you guys.
Thank you
Thank
very
you too,
much.
Alex. We appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.